Welcome to LLP, the Lawyer Life podcast, where the personal, professional, and political intersect. Each week we cover a topic to help ourselves and other lawyers navigate our days with a little less stress and ideally a lot more fulfillment. On today's episode, we talk negotiation. We're asking ourselves, what makes a great negotiator? And are we bullies, boring, or buddies? I'm Mike Anderson.
And I'm Darlene Tonelli.
Hello, Darlene. I almost couldn't get through that intro. You're laughing.
Well, we've made up our own classification system. It's slightly less, I don't know what the word is, awesome than the one that we read about in book club.
Well, it's certainly...
Or more awesome, depending who's talking about it.
They both use alliteration, which is my favorite poetic device.
Okay.
What was it? Cleaners, closers, and...
Coolers.
Coolers.
Yes.
So now we're going to the B. We're up a
Okay.
level. Bullies, borings, which is the one we don't like, or buddies.
Buddies. Okay, so explain
I'm not
what
your
it
buddy,
means.
pal.
Why are we talking about negotiation?
Because we do it all the time?
We feel we can add value somehow by talking about the things that we most admire in other people when they're negotiating, the things we like to see, and then also highlighting a couple of things that maybe we would like to suggest that we avoid, or what's
Yeah.
Okay.
This is one of my favorite things that I get to do in my job. Yeah. It's like, it's problem solving, and it's personal dynamics, and it's academic, and it's a bunch of like things I actually personally really enjoy flexing. I enjoy flexing those muscles.
Okay, me too. So what would you say is, what's a boring? Let's start there.
A boring. Okay. So, and you tell me what you think. I think a boring is like just standard down the middle negotiation approach, where you take a look at the merits of the issue. There is no like persona element. It's just two people working on a thing to try to get it done. And sometimes that occurs because it's not that tough of a deal, or the deal doesn't merit real like adversarial relationships, or even isn't long enough that you could strike up a relationship. It's transactional.
Or
you get in, you get
neither
out.
side cares.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. That's kind of when you really can feel that boring vibe, that's because neither side is particularly vested. It's just their job to be there and negotiate the solution. Okay. Makes sense.
And what do you think about the boring scenario? Is that all that bad?
It's not bad. I mean, it's not, we talk a lot on this podcast about loving your job and doing the things that, being in a role that makes you feel like you care about the outcome. So, I don't know. I don't idealize the boringness, but it has its place.
Yeah.
Let's go to the other ones.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
You want to talk buddies or bullies?
Buddies.
Buddies. This is my favorite.
Okay.
I like this
I'm
one.
not surprised. Yes.
This is but the buddy type negotiation is, I think, typically occurs when you have or are able to quickly strike a relationship with the other side.
Right.
And I think it's a very good situation to be in, because having a relationship where you both are on the same level of reasonableness, and you both are looking for a good result and are willing to find kind of like secret hidden bits of value, and are able to go there because you're able to have that conversation. I think that you wind up having you're more likely to have a good result for both sides.
Would you say that's win-win negotiating?
Oh,
Because then I would love to hear your thoughts on win-win.
yeah, that would be an example of that. I mean, I think that would, the buddy type negotiation approach, I think, would be most likely to get you to a win-win. What do you think?
In law school, the book was called Getting to Yes.
Yeah,
I
I know that
remember,
one.
right?
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
everyone read that book.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's overplayed in that not every negotiating situation is a win-win, right? There are some where the right result is for one side to just win and the other side to lose. That is sometimes the right thing.
But sometimes if you are the side that is destined to lose, and that's the baseline. Like if you understand that this is not, we don't have the leverage or we don't have the merits, sometimes you can win.
You can get a win.
Yes. On the basis that you're likely to lose. So for example, if you know you're going to have to pay something, maybe you pay less, or maybe you get to pay over a longer duration, or these sort of pieces, which would be small wins.
Right. So you're so positive. You're like, it's not a loss. It's a win because it's slightly improved.
Because it's all relative.
Yes, it's relative. Okay, that's good. I think that makes sense. I like the idea of win-win. I like the idea of getting to yes. And I like the idea that it's not a zero-sum game, generally, almost always. I mean, I cannot think of very many negotiations where it's zero-sum, where meaning, what's good for one side is automatically bad for the other side. I don't even know that that's true. I mean, even now, we're seeing a lot of commercial negotiations, or I see a lot of commercial negotiations. And there are some parties that just sort of lay down the law and they say, this is our deal, take it or leave it. I don't know. I mean, maybe you win a couple times, but what's the cost of not doing the deal all the times that someone leaves it? And what's the cost of never getting a deal that both parties think is good? I think there's a cost to that. I know we've talked about that before on the podcast, but I think that we're coming out of an era where everyone felt that, you leave a negotiation, you get everything you want, and that's a win. New era, I think, is we're figuring out as we go. Things are less cut and dried than they used to be. It's not clear to me even that we always know what a win is when we go in. Sometimes I come out and I'm like, that's actually a better solution for everybody.
Yes.
I wouldn't have thought of that had we not established a buddy relationship, for example. Okay, so that makes sense.
It's also about what your business is and what you're trying to achieve.
Right.
And some businesses are focused on transactions, and it's not building long-term relationships or partnerships. And it's just, take this, here's the thing, take it or leave it. And if there's a negotiation, it's probably a basic negotiation and done. If you're in an industry or your focus is more on relationship building and longer term and so on, there's like phrasing in sports, like I'm a big baseball fan, they say it's a good baseball trade is when both sides wind up getting what they wanted. It just so happens that at the point where the trade was made, somebody's trying to win now, so they want that great player currently, and somebody's willing to take on prospects because they want to win in 3 or 4 years. Everybody wins. And so I suppose that's only a priority for folks if you actually care about dealing with the other side again.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, repeat business. All right, we're seeing some good parameters here. What about the bully?
Oh, look out.
Define and then discuss.
Man. So I would say that core to a bully is leveraging anything in their disposal and over leveraging it in some instances, not being fair or open or reasonable, not only unwilling to move from their points, but probably also overreaching into areas that they shouldn't even be pushing for. I don't know. What do you think?
The word bully is big in our society right now. Kids in school are taught a lot more about bullying than my generation was. For example, the president of the United States, he has the bully pulpit, which has always been called that, but right now, maybe fits a bit better. And then I think that in negotiation, you can usually identify a bully pretty early on by just looking at some of the traits in the schoolyard, like a standard negotiating tactic that sort of, I think, can show a bully in their element is to, immediately pick off a weaker opponent, to kind of push around. That's just a basic bullying thing. I think when you're dealing with a bully, it has to change the negotiation style of everybody else in the equation.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the defining feature of a bully. I think if a person goes into a negotiation with someone that is demonstrating bullying tactics early on and doesn't change their strategy from buddy or even boring, frankly, and if it doesn't, then the bully wins. And that may or may not be the right result, probably the wrong result.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I find the tough thing when there is a bully in a negotiation is then all the stuff that people, I would say, stereotype about lawyers or getting involved in a legal process starts to rear its head. Drawn out timelines, high costs, maybe mistreatment of folks. It's these sort of things that come into play that it almost winds up in some ways to start to be about the game of the game of negotiation and not about the actual negotiation. And that it becomes inside baseball for lawyers, and it's tough for clients who ultimately want the thing to be resolved, the deal to get done, whatever you're working on. And then all of a sudden you're having to explain how this bully is over leveraging a process or another point unreasonably, and having to deal with that first. And that's going to take weeks or whatever before you can actually get back to merits. Whatever the points are outstanding. So that's the thing that frustrates me about that scenario. And I suppose maybe it is called for in some instances to be, the overzealous advocate that, maybe somebody is in this setting. But the downside is, I think that for especially the clients, it winds up becoming something unto itself.
Well, it's interesting now in this day and age too, as we say things are maybe changing. We do have such huge companies right now that control so much land. And that's always been the case, right? Like it was just different companies in previous eras. But there are people who have a real monopolistic position in that they're not a monopoly under the law, maybe, but they have a monopoly on something that other people need. And there's no other way to deal with it than to deal with these parties. Though that's tough to negotiate against. I've seen a couple of tactics that have worked. And so far, I think that, if we go into like what we admire, I think all of these strategies have a place. I should be clear. I don't think that no one's, with small exceptions, no one's a bully all the time. No one's a bully for every client all the time. Or if they are, I don't see how that can be a good strategy. Unless you have a client and their strategy is bullying and that's what you're trying to achieve.
Like Bob Ray mentioned in the podcast last week about using a lawyer as like a blunt tool.
Yeah, a blunt instrument. I thought that was so interesting that he said that, because I think what he was saying, a small digression from negotiation, but I've thought about it since last week. And I think what he was saying is that someone is basically using you for your law degree almost to say, here's what I want to accomplish, go get it done.
Yes.
And, he's right about that is something that could happen, I guess, in theory, particularly maybe in different areas of law, or I don't know, I guess it could happen.
But it certainly could make you into a bully, because if you have a client who says, this is the result that I want no matter what, I'm only willing to pay X, or I'm not willing to pay a cent, and then you wind up, that is your position. So what is, in that instance where you might otherwise want to be a buddy or whatever, you do become the bully by nature of the instructions you've been given. And that is, we are always limited by the instructions we're given, right?
Yes, but also part of the reason we're talking about this on the podcast is that we're looking at all these different pieces of being a lawyer and sort of how do we raise the bar. Mike loves puns and I don't ever make puns. Oh my God, that's so good. That will come up over and over. Can you find some cheering noises for that?
I have a sound effect from last week.
Okay, yeah. We should just use that all the time. So, if we're trying to raise the bar on our lawyerly skills, I would like to see some of this stuff. If your client says, I want you to be as follows, I don't know. I guess we do things for the client, but we also have to maintain our professional standards and civility. And the Law Society does enforce some standards of civility, but I think moreover, powerful clients can also really engender that in the lawyers that they choose. So for example, I think I've mentioned before, I've dealt with one major company many times in my life, and they have a very civil culture. They have very fair deals. They do not move from their deals. So they present a fair deal. I, as a person on the other side, understand that even though I have represented a large client on the other side, the fact that they present a fair contract in the first place makes my job a little bit easier, because it's like, okay, well, I actually don't mind dealing with the other side because they're very civil. They tell me what the parameters are. We can move those parameters, but it's all done very civilly. That's kind of the tone that I wish was just what people wanted. And I think that the more we talk about that as maybe a good that can achieve even better results than the the traditional style of like used car salesman negotiation, that to me would be a win for our profession. Like I saw a friend of mine tweeted yesterday that she's a lawyer. She was in an elevator and someone told her a lawyer joke and said something about lawyers having no heart. And she obviously she's a very feisty individual, she said, you know, lawyers do have a heart, or you've just told a lawyer joke to a lawyer, pardon me. And it was awkward. But I thought about it and I thought, the awkward thing about it is like maybe that's true, because if we're asked to do things and in our position of advocate we become sort of an unpleasant, uncivil person to be around, we bring those things on ourselves, right? So the more people don't agree to do that in our profession, I think the better. And this is why we're talking about it in part. And there might be other reasons too.
The tough thing, I'm trying to empathize with the bully. And I think a lot, especially I suppose if you aren't given the express instructions from your client, you know, as the one you're talking about, you know, be fair, but here are the parameters, and you know we can move here and we can't. If they're just like, get me the best deal, right? Then you want to be leveraging as much as you can to do that job well, and you have to do it. And so I think that the piece that we're missing here is there. You know, when we say bully, it is not the same as just advocating as best you can. Right. It's kind of in a way that with bad will or with deception, trying to do that and leveraging tools that aren't transparent, authentic, fair.
Well, and the assumption is we're going to get it. I think all of these types of negotiators can get a great deal, right? Like getting a great deal is the requirement.
Yeah.
I think what I take issue with is the assumption that unless you have this sort of thing that people have seen on TV,
that's
is
right,
how you do it, that you're not going to be a good negotiator. I think cultural differences play in, even American Canadian, I can speak to from personal experience. Yeah. There are a number of things that play into a negotiation, and I think the key is to, as we become more diverse as a profession, as we become more women and men are more balanced in our profession, I think that there is room for so many styles. And I think that when I look at the number of people in my circle who are lawyers, their personality, their negotiating style, there is room for every lawyer too. I mean, I think if you're someone who in your day, and I do have an associate, a friend who has this style, there's a place for that, because sometimes there's a matter that person is best placed to be the negotiator on, and I would say that their style is probably consistent all the time, right, in the more bully side of the spectrum. But I think it's just the assumption that that's appropriate in all situations. It's not. Like that is clear to me from having been in a number of negotiations that have ended more favorably because we were able to overcome that by one of the parties.
That's right.
Right? So it's just like, this goes back to something key, which you and I talked about. So negotiation is barely taught at law school. This is crazy to me, because every single area of law, whether you're a commercial lawyer like we are, or you're a litigator, you're negotiating. I mean, litigators maybe have to only negotiate at different points, but they're negotiating every day about motion, timing, and then they're settling, maybe they're mediating. And for me, I'm just still very shocked at how little energy is spent in law school on teaching the fundamentals. Generally speaking, we learned more about being an advocate for a client. Negotiating, though, it's like people assume it's somehow instinctive for lawyers, which, being married to another legally trained person, I can say it is instinctive, and I think argumentative and people who like to make their cases go to law school in the first place. So there's some truth to that, but why do we not learn it more, and how can we? So maybe what we should do at this point is to say, okay, what are some of the things that we have seen in negotiations that we think are really top level skills or attributes, or what worked well and maybe something that didn't work well?
Well, we've talked about before the trend, commercial negotiations, of some lawyers now who are very clear about here's what I'm willing to negotiate, and here's where I'm not.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's a bully tactic necessarily, but it hopefully it's reasonable what they're talking about. I think that's fair. I think that being upfront and transparent will only help the negotiation. What I've dealt with that I think is negative and frustrating and doesn't serve anybody well is deception games, constantly a moving target. Now, that might be a strategy, but it's not one that I appreciate or think drives a good result.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's definitely, I've seen that. I also actually admire when someone sets out the sort of the goalposts at the beginning, although there is some power in being the one setting the goalposts, right? For sure. Mm-hmm. So if you say the negotiation needs to happen within these parameters, you've already achieved some ground, right, in the negotiation. So but it's still useful because, it's up to the other side then to suss out, is that a real parameter,
right,
or is it one that is conflicting with one of my own parameters, in which case we got to move these goalposts.
Or sorry to cut you off, but if it is a the other side has a lot of heft and weight. Right. And if they're saying, I'm not going to move on this certain point, yes, and that's true,
yep,
and that's incompatible with your client,
yeah,
then no one's wasting their time, right? Like then it's like, if legitimately we can't agree on this fundamental piece,
yeah,
maybe this just isn't right, and then at least it's done early. Right. Whereas if there's no reason then to go through a month-long negotiation if this point, which seemed like it was in play, really isn't, and things blow up,
right. Knowing all the facts and being extremely well prepared is not always a winning strategy. It's necessary. Mm-hmm. It's table stakes. So to properly negotiate, you must know your file inside out, backwards, sideways, obviously. Well, maybe not obviously. Obviously.
Hopefully we got that.
Best case scenario. Yeah. And then, what I have found, though, is that the bamboozle is a useful strategy for those less prepared, and you can gain ground with it if the other side is not prepared for it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, earlier in my career, I had a negotiation, and this is, more than 10 years ago, so I feel comfortable talking about it in the abstract. I had a situation where the other side just never... Their responses were so out in left field and so not understanding the playing field that I kept revisiting my own position and saying, they're saying this and we're saying this, so maybe we should move a little bit towards them. And what I realized was we could have held our position and just said, you don't know what you're talking about. You need to go and get better prepared. And I've since, the reason that I'm confident to say I think this is a thing is that I've seen it in public negotiations that have played out. So if I'm reading about something in the press and I think, oh, there's that thing, there's the bamboozle, don't respond to it. Uh-huh. Don't give in to it. Yeah. So the onus is on the bamboozler. Sorry, it's such a funny word to use, but we're using bees. So
not the bamboozle-y.
I guess the bamboozle is another bee negotiating style. One to watch for, because the bamboozler is very hard to negotiate with, particularly if you're someone who, as most lawyers are, believe that the facts should be relevant. But I think in this increasing age of sort of people saying whatever and truth being hard to come by, if I don't understand what the other side is doing or where they're coming from, or how their responses address what I'm looking for, I'm very comfortable now to say, not following you.
Explain this to me.
Talk me through it like I'm a 4-year-old, which is from a movie. Right?
I love that moment.
Yeah. So it's, but I respect it as a strategy in that it can be effective.
Right.
I wouldn't do it. I would never want to be someone who, people hired because I'm going to bamboozle people. That's not my thing. But it's just to be aware of. As a person who operates in good faith, you have to be aware when you've got a bully on your hands. You have to be aware of the bamboozler. And then the underlying piece of all of this is just to try, doing something as Bob Ray talked about last week. Like everyone has their moments where you think, I probably shouldn't have said that. But I like when the other side thinks that was a good result for our client, or for her client, and then comes back. So that doesn't happen, I don't think, if you're sort of alienating everybody on the call with your incivility.
And it all ladders up, I think, to close all this off, to not be the bully, or to not conduct yourself in negotiations that you would not otherwise conduct yourself in the rest of your life. To be true to yourself in these settings will only mean you go home and you're a better pet owner, spouse, whatever, parent,
pet owner,
neighbor.
Rosie thinks.
I start with pet owner.
You start with pet owner.
But
yes.
it sets you up to again live the life that you're satisfied and happy with. And I think I would struggle if every day I had to conduct myself in a way that wasn't consistent with my values or principles or the way that I normally am. And so it's not only, we're obviously driving for best result for the client first. We're respecting the other side, and we're making sure that we can, to the extent we can have an amicable relationship and deal, great. But then also that if we succeed on those two fronts, then we go home and we feel good about ourselves.
Right.
Right.
We're congruent. We talked earlier on a podcast about being congruent between your work in the office, your life outside the office. I think the more congruent we are, the better for everybody. So good. You did a great summary, as usual.
Oh, thank you.
Good.
Because it's all that I can keep in my brain.
I know, it works.
So I suppose we'll go to break, and then after this, we'll do our goods and grapes. The Lawyer Life Podcast is brought to you by Inter Alia Law, experienced legal counsel when and where you need us. To learn more about Inter Alia, visit the website. That's spelled INTERALIA-law.com. Thank you. And we're back.
Hello.
How was your break?
It was good. It was lengthy. It was good. I'm excited to do goods and grapes.
Okay.
I'm really getting into the spirit of goods and grapes. I even thought of I probably have to even cut back my grape today, but actually you start, because my good and grape are mixed.
So I was at the University of Toronto Law School this morning to speak on a panel about public interest and alternative type careers, which is great. But my good is that it seems like, and I've been out of school for 5 years, 5.5 years. Schools, from what I can see from the few times I'm in them lately, have really picked up on the well-being piece. And so in the bathroom, there was a keep calm and reach out if you need help sign. Or if you're stressed out. And I've seen on law school campuses, student associations popping up that are focused on well-being and on combating the mental health issues in the profession and addiction issues in the profession. And so I just think it's a really great way to start off your career with that focus and that being something that there's an invitation for that conversation. I can't recall that totally being the case when I was in school, and so it's nice to see that change. That's my good. That
is good. I have a good and a gripe. My good is algorithms on Netflix, and my gripe...
You already did an algorithm
I
good.
know, but I'm going to tie it in. So my gripe is algorithms on Netflix, and I'll also tie it to another discussion of Riverdale. So...
Oh, no.
I spoke a couple podcasts ago about I love Apple Music and the For You algorithm. This is good. On Netflix, I really like their recommendations to me, right? Mm-hmm. The cross sort of, if you like this show, you'll like that show. That's cool. What I am starting to be a little bit troubled by is that I try really hard, and we have talked about this on the podcast too, but I try really hard to sort of have a media diet of somewhat positive things. And so when I started watching Riverdale, I thought, this is a nice kind of throwback to the Archie comics. And I think that the interesting thing about the Netflix algorithm is that it tracks, I believe, what people are responding to in their created shows. And the reason I think this is that if you watch this show, it's getting darker and darker and darker and darker and more violent. Yeah. And more, Archie constantly is not wearing a shirt. Yeah. I feel like this must have tested well on the algorithm or something, because it's becoming ridiculous. Like it's the point where you're delivering the customer what they want, I guess. I feel like, and maybe this is just an accident. Maybe it's just this is where the show was going to go. And I would love for someone to enlighten me on this, because it just feels like, oh, you like this? Have more, have more, have more. And I just don't want that. I want to just stay basic. And it's coming to the point where my gripe is that the stuff...
Wait, that was not a gripe?
It was a gripe. But my gripe is really at the end of, if these algorithms are picking up on sort of the what's going on in society, that's a bad thing, I think. Because I'm finding it very hard to find media that is not violent or explicit or, that just is feel good. I want an escape from the political stuff that's happening. I would like some very mild, what was the show back in the day? Like back in the day when you couldn't algorithmically test people's responses to your content that you're making. You had the Wonder Years, the Winnie Cooper and the, Fred Savage and the voiceover and Growing Pains, right? You have these sort of like, I just don't feel like we have that. Anyway, so that's my lengthy gripe.
So I think it's a gripe that ties into, I just feel like in general, all we're getting, especially from what we get from the US, is just like content that feeds the part of us that's the easiest to feed, but we shouldn't all be nourishing that side of us. Like it's a lot of what is occurring, I feel like in the US is appealing to not our better angels, but the other thing. Yes. And that's like eating cotton candy every day. Like everybody loves cotton candy, but we need to be nourished. And so there's just where you see where media is going and so on, like all the nourishing things are not being supported, and the quick cotton candy type things, that's where all the money is going to. Did you know Netflix, even on the picture of the thing, it selects the certain image of a show for you? So like if we both look at the same movie on our Netflix profiles, I might have a picture of like the female lead and you might have a picture of the male lead if Netflix thinks that will make us watch the show better.
Interesting. You might have to take a picture of what you see on your Riverdale.
My algorithm is so messed up because we don't care enough about and so it's like it's Peppa Pig beside Last Man on Earth beside whatever.
Maybe I should do that. I don't know why it keeps feeding me all these things. I mean, usually all of my things in the algorithm would be like music documentary. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have like 6 music documentaries, but yet when I scroll through, just one of the ones I just like, that's a show? Like, I don't mean to be this old person who's like, what on earth? Who wants to watch that? Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I would welcome just some more innocence in our media.
Yeah.
It just seems to be going the way of the dinosaur. So, gripe. And as Mike says, I always bring in the heavy political topics.
I gripe about toasters, and you gripe about
I don't feel
societal
gripes
trends.
About small things so
That's
much.
what a gripe is.
I feel about big things. Okay, you need to give me better details. We need to
do gripe lessons. Okay, that's it, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Okay, bye.
That's it for this week's episode of LLP. Thanks to Inter Alia Law for presenting the podcast and to Nick Fowler for composing and performing our music. See our show notes for his website. Don't forget, we love feedback. Please comment in the review section or subscribe or like. We'd appreciate it greatly. That's it. Talk soon.